a technological masterpiece lost to a Norwegian fjord.
When you get up close, you realize there's a lot more than meets the eye.
An ambitious Arctic structure that became an environmental hazard.
Nothing had ever been built like it. It was one of the greatest feats of Arctic engineering that's ever been.
A mysterious concrete giant on an icy mountain peak.
Vedged is this amazing structure that is a little bit mysterious. It reminds me of something out of a 1970s sci-fi film.
And a fantastical castle in the middle of the Hudson River.
He left an incredible building, which is an icon all over the world.
Once they were some of the most advanced structures and facilities on the planet, at the cutting edge of design and construction. Today, they stand abandoned, contaminated, and sometimes deadly. But who built them and how? And why were they abandoned? Deep beneath the Norwegian fjord, near the port of Narvik, lies a forgotten engineering masterpiece. From among the scattered debris littering the sea floor rises a corroded bulk of metal, 37 feet wide.
When you first see this mass of twisted, rusting steel in the otherwise beautiful setting of Norwegian fjords, you think, hang on, someone's just been dumping junk down here.
For 390 feet, it climbs towards the rocky shoreline of Rombaksfjord, where it protrudes out of the water. Yet something appears to have crushed and warped this metal structure.
When you get up close and actually you see just how twisted and mangled this massive rusty steel is, you realize it's not just the roof of someone's shed that they've lobbed down there to disintegrate into the seas. Actually, there's a lot more than meets the eye.
What is this mysterious metal wreck? Why is it here in the pristine Nordic wilderness? And why was it abandoned? On the 1st of March 1940, Adolf Hitler ordered the invasion of neutral Norway. Looking to exploit the country's long coastline and intent on obtaining essential raw materials for his growing war machine. One of these was high-grade iron ore flowing from the port of Narvik. But these waters were patrolled by Britain's Royal Navy, still the most powerful navy in the world. To compete, the German Navy needed a modern fleet of the fastest and most maneuverable ships, destroyers.
Destroyers are not mini battleships. They are, to some degree, expendable weapons with relatively small crews. And they're capable of a multitude of operations. They're an essential part of the Navy.
Destroyers were originally developed in the late 19th century in response to the emergence of torpedo boats. Through the interwar years, they were light vessels with little endurance, but packed with armor and capable of high speeds. They could escort merchant convoys, but were increasingly built as weapons to counter submarines and aircraft. In the 1930s, Germany, in breach of the Versailles Treaty, began building destroyers again.
They create a warship that represents the absolute apogee of German technology. And these destroyers are going to be the best warships on the sea.
Hitler's new fleet were the Type 1934 destroyers. And this is the Georg Thiele. At the cutting edge of warship technology, it cost around £67 million in today's money to build. And she entered service in 1937.
The Georg Thiele was one of the first of Hitler's new breed of warship that he believed was going to win him the war on the waves. It was bigger, it was faster, and much more heavily armed than anything it was going to come up against.
On the 6th of April 1940, Georg Thiele and 9 other high-speed, heavily armed destroyers headed for Narvik. On board were 3,000 elite mountain troops, spearheading the German invasion of Norway. Viggo Kristensen is an author of the epic naval battles that took place at Narvik.
They had a very sophisticated machinery, high-pressure boilers, delivering high-pressure steam to the turbines. And that gave the German destroyers very high speed, more than 40 knots. Comparing to the English destroyers, the highest speed was about 32 knots.
Despite her speed and sophistication, her modern design was overcomplicated, and compared with Royal Navy destroyers, mechanical breakdowns were common.
The Germans build warships that, on paper, are excellent, but on the high seas, they just can't perform properly.
One of the ship's key design flaws was that she was top-heavy, making her unstable in rough seas. To avoid the threat of capsizing, her fuel tanks had to remain just 30% full at all times. And that wasn't her only weakness.
They were so heavy at the front, they'd really dip into the water in heavy weather and take on hundreds of gallons of water. The engines were unreliable, and the guns were too big.
Their powerful arsenal consisted of 5-inch guns, 4 37mm anti-aircraft guns, and 8 21-inch torpedo tubes. For all its defects, this was still a fierce fighting machine. On April the 10th, 1940, the 10 destroyers powered towards Narvik.
They actually very successfully landed in a surprise attack on Narvik, landed their invasion force, which fairly quickly seized the railhead, and the town of Narvik drove out the defending Norwegians.
Yet victory was short-lived. A Royal Navy attack force thundered in to retake Narvik.
They're coming with these highly tuned German sports cars of destroyers, and they're coming up against these clunky Royal Navy Land Rover destroyers. And the Germans, they fight very well.
The Georg Thiele unleashed hell, taking out one of the Royal Navy destroyers. But outnumbered and in the narrow confines of the fjord, she was unable to take advantage of her superior speed and firepower. Suffering 7 major hits in the process, 14 of her 325-man crew were killed.
You're operating in an impossible situation. You're in an enclosed area. You can't effectively use your torpedo, and the British have brought in cruisers and much heavier ships.
British firepower sent 6 German destroyers to the bottom of the fjord. Trapped, low on ammunition and fuel, the surviving German destroyers fled. But the Georg Thiele stood defiant, firing her last torpedo as British destroyer HMS Eskimo closed in.
Georg Thiele's last torpedo blew the bow off the Eskimo.
The Royal Navy set its sights on the Georg Thiele. Badly damaged, there was no escape.
So the only option they had was to ram their ship as fast as they could onto the shore. That would allow their crew some chance of escape onto land and would effectively scuttle the ships.
She headed for shore at a speed of 45 knots, beaching herself on Rombuksfjord.
What a sight that must have been. It's pretty much a third of the ship that made its way up onto land to allow its crew some chance of escape. But just a phenomenal sacrifice that those captains made of the technology and potentially of their crew as well.
With her fate sealed, the ship's crew fled and escaped into the surrounding hills. The battles of Narvik, however, had cost the German Navy dearly. Half their total destroyer force was lost. Breaking in two, the stern of this German war machine sank deep into the Rombuksfjord, while the bow rolled onto its side. It was left mangled and abandoned. Today, the twisted steel plates of Georg Thiele still lie in this Norwegian backwater. Never able to fully unleash her superior speed, maneuverability, and firepower, she was ultimately defeated by the surroundings in which she fought.
Well, in another 20, 30 years or so, it's likely what's left will disintegrate and slip further down and finally come to rest on the seabed, joining its sister ships down there. And maybe that is a more fitting end to the last remaining survivor of Hitler's long-vanished fleet.
Around 3,500 miles west, high in the Chugach Mountains of Alaska, is one of the world's first feats of Arctic engineering. Wedged in a glacier-lined gap, 178 feet above the fast-flowing Copper River, this rusting steel bridge is almost 500 meters in length.
Nothing had ever been built like it. It was one of the greatest feats of Arctic engineering that's ever been, and it's been copied many times since.
It really required some innovative thinking, and the challenges were pretty demonstrable.
Supporting the steel bridge are three huge concrete legs, each 64 feet long and 21 feet thick at the base.
To get all of that material in a very pristine Alaskan wilderness is truly mind-blowing.
Yet a closer look reveals some unusual elements to this mammoth structure that hint at the unique challenges this construction faced.
You have these concrete blocks coming out of the water. Why?
What are these concrete wedges? And why was this seemingly intact structure abandoned? In 1900, Alaska was rich in undiscovered natural resources. Deep in the territory's Wrangell Mountains, prospectors discovered high-grade copper ore and set up the Kennecott mine to extract the valuable mineral. But that was only half the battle. How would they transport this priceless ore to civilization? The mine's owners, J.P. Morgan and Daniel Guggenheim, sank $25 million into the Copper River Railway. At 196 miles long, the route faced a multitude of obstacles thrown up by the Alaskan climate and landscape.
Whenever you have engineering projects in high latitudes, the Arctic regions, Antarctic regions, it's a problem. It might be easier to work there in winter when the ground's more solid. You've got that dynamic problem of a melt season. As you've got lots of snow, when you get the summer, short summer, you get lots and lots of water, so you get big rivers. So all of these things make engineering projects in such environments very, very difficult.
Standing in its way were steep canyons, gale-force winds, rivers, and glaciers. In particular, two formidable walls of ice. the Childs and Miles River glaciers. Barely 3 miles apart, they blocked both banks of the Copper River. The only solution was to build this, the Miles Glacier Bridge, better known as the $1 Million Bridge.
The $1 Million Bridge is aptly named because that's what it cost to construct. It was a completely unique engineering challenge.
Luke Borer is a local businessman and has intimate knowledge of the challenges they faced.
It was new technology for everything. Nobody had a glacier on both sides of a bridge that's dumping 1,000-ton icebergs and 100-mile-an-hour winds and 60 below zero temperatures across a river that has a current of 10 knots. Plus the fact access to here was near impossible.
This impossible bridge had to be light enough to stretch across the river, but strong enough to take the river's current and the strain of 2 fully loaded trains meeting in the middle of the span. To achieve this economically, engineers built 4 steel truss spans mounted on 3 concrete piers.
So this bridge is a Pennsylvania truss bridge. Now engineers love trusses because they're full of triangles, and triangles are a strong shape. It also means you've got thinner pieces of steel and you're cleverly channeling loads and forces through it into the foundations to create an efficient structure and a light structure.
Construction of the Miles Glacier Bridge began in April 1909. The workers were in a race against time. The melt season released 1,000-ton icebergs that could potentially sweep away all their hard work. They finished in a breakneck 13 months and improvised the structure to deal with these potentially devastating battering rams.
You try and deflect them. You try and stop those massive pieces of ice from actually hitting the bridge itself.
There's 2 icebreakers, one in front of Pier 1 and one in front of Pier 3. They're both approximately 53 feet long, 31 feet wide, buried about 20 feet into the bed of the river and sticking out of the water all of about 18 feet. The icebergs come down and hit that and are either split or deflected by the icebreakers so that the ice doesn't hit the piers themselves.
With the bridge complete and now protected, the first 1,200-ton load of high-grade copper ore traveled across the Miles Glacier Bridge in 1911. For the next 27 years, the bridge withstood the elements to bring its investors a massive return.
So even though the bridge is called the $1 Million Bridge for its day, which was a lot of money, the amount of money that came out of the mine, almost over $200 million, more than paid for the extravagant sum that was spent at the time.
The bridge proved a vital and hugely profitable lifeline. But in November 1938, having exhausted its resources, the Kennecott copper mine shut down, and plans were made to transform the railway bed into a highway for vehicles. Then, at 5:36 a.m. on March the 27th, 1964, disaster struck.
The earthquake that struck Alaska in 1964 is recorded as the second largest earthquake ever recorded in human history.
Whole communities were destroyed, and 139 people killed in an earthquake with a magnitude of 9.2.
The 64 earthquake knocked down Span 4. It fell down into the water basically intact, but the reason it fell is the pier supporting it had sliced itself in half because there was no structural reinforcement in the concrete.
Armor rails were embedded in the surface of the concrete, running vertically to just above the high water mark. This was to protect it from icebergs. Above these armor rails, the concrete was sheared off by the force of the earthquake. It left engineers grappling with a problem for the next 40 years. If the rest of the bridge collapsed, it could create an environmental disaster, not only blocking the Copper River below, but poisoning its waters with its lead coating. The engineers were torn between repairing or demolishing the bridge, but in the end, its fate was determined by financial considerations.
It was less expensive to repair it than it was to take it out. In excess of $100 million was estimated to take the bridge out, and they spent $17 million on phase one to fix the bridge.
In 2004, work began to rebuild the damaged pier and raise the fallen span back into place. Despite the repairs, the bridge was redundant as the highway it served could no longer reach it. The Miles Glacier Bridge was abandoned. Today, the bridge serves no purpose but remains a tourist attraction, as well as being an environmental ticking time bomb.
It requires upkeep. It's too expensive to get rid of. So what are you going to do with it? Today, the $1 Million Bridge is literally a bridge to nowhere.
Over 5,000 miles away across the Atlantic, high up in the central Balkan Mountains of Bulgaria, is a structure that appears out of this world. Through the cold, swirling mist, a strange, curved concrete surface emerges, punctuated by oblong openings.
An amazing structure that is a little bit mysterious, I think I'd say. It reminds me of something out of a 1970s sci-fi film.
Eerie light and haze pierce the decaying copper roof that covers this abandoned 22,500-ton structure.
It looks like a UFO or a flying saucer with a concrete spire going above it.
The 230-foot-high tower, tapering to only 30 feet at its base, rises from the concrete disc. But its purpose is almost impossible to decipher.
If you told me it was the control center for nuclear missiles, I'd believe you. If you told me it was some paganist cult worship center, I'd believe you. It's confusing.
What is this extraordinary complex? Why is it here, 4,600 feet up in the central Balkan Mountains? The answer lies behind the Iron Curtain of the 1970s. At this time, Bulgaria was the Soviet Union's most loyal Eastern ally, thanks to the country's communist dictator, Todor Zhikov. As head of state, he looked to a common cause in Bulgaria's history and a unifying project on a grand scale that would ignite nationalist spirit and unite his people under the communist banner. He chose a site of huge national pride and significance.
The location is important to Bulgarians because it's built on the site of a 19th century battle between Bulgarian rebels, which became the Communist Party, and the forces of the Ottoman Empire.
After battling against 5 centuries of Ottoman occupation and founding the Bulgarian Communist Party here, this was also the site where partisans lost their lives fighting fascist forces during World War II. All combined to make this a national symbol of heroism and self-sacrifice. And the perfect location for this, the Buzlutsa Monument.
First impressions when you see the monument are sort of bewilderment. When you see monuments, there's classical shapes. This is not classical in any way. And so it's strikingly strange.
For me, Buzlutsa pretty much exemplifies the methods communism used to keep people under the thumb and to exert the power over the people through their brutalistic and oppressive architecture.
The project began on the 23rd of January 1974. However, creating such a massive structure on top of this inhospitable mountain range was no easy task.
Constructing anything of large size in a remote area is challenging. I think it was sort of classical socialist will that decided, you know, we're going to build this building right here, and no matter what it takes, we're going to cart all this material up this mountain. We're going to dynamite the top off the mountain, and this is what we're going to do, and they did it.
530,000 cubic feet of rock were blasted away to level the top of the mountain, dropping its height by an incredible 30 feet. At such high altitude, the progress of construction was at the mercy of the elements. Workers battled heavy snowfall, high winds, and enveloping mists. They worked around the clock to achieve the build in the narrow weather window from May to September. With such a demanding schedule, a constant supply of materials was vital.
Now this thing's made out of concrete, so you need to get the aggregates up there, you need to get the wet concrete up there, you need to mix it up, make sure that it's all, you know, properly molded together. You need to get the formwork up there so that you can actually shape the concrete. It's really a big logistical challenge.
Despite these difficulties, 70,000 tons of concrete and 3,000 tons of steel were used to construct the monument. At its core was a Y-shaped base that took the whole vertical load of the unique saucer. Centered around a simple interior structure, it was the futuristic outer shell that posed the greatest challenge. Dora Ivanova is an architect and runs the Buzludza project. She works to reconstruct the monument and preserve it for future generations.
The design of the monument was a great challenge for the engineering in the 70s. The shape and the concrete was calculated by computers in Moscow.
When you're trying to make something as curved and as sinuous as this structure that we're looking at here, then you need to think about, well, how am I actually going to achieve that? So it's a really interesting challenge for engineers, especially in that era, to create these really smooth curves against which they then want to pour the concrete.
And the principle can be actually explained with turned-up umbrella. They're thick steel ropes that are pre-stressed and concreted in order to create this overhang of 25 meters.
The futuristic design was inspired by a fascination with space. This was the era not only of the first man in space, but the first Bulgarian in space. An impressive 30 tons of copper cladding covers the roof of the saucer, which can be heated to melt heavy snowfall, preventing the roof from collapse.
One of the biggest challenges that the engineers would have had to consider in designing this is the amount of snow that the roof would need to resist. So having this shallow dome shape is actually a fairly good shape because it will allow some snow to kind of move its way off and to flow off.
A striking element of this construction is the tower that soars from the mountaintop towards the sky. Its summit takes the load of two 39-feet-high red glass stars, each weighing a colossal 3.5 tons.
They were the biggest illuminated stars in the world. They could be seen from hundreds of kilometers away by good weather.
No expense was spared on the lavish interior of the structure.
From the outside, you see this brutalist concrete version of the Millennium Falcon. On the inside, the feeling's quite different. They used 35 tons of mosaic and stained glass to decorate the inside to give it the atmosphere that they wanted.
The mosaics were not just for decorative purposes. Every element within the monument was a reminder of the communist cause.
From the one side could be seen the faces of Lenin, Marx, and Engels, and from the other side, the Bulgarian communist leaders.
A 538-square-foot mosaic of the hammer and sickle crowns the center of this monumental achievement. It took 7 years, 6,000 volunteers, and more than £25 million in today's money to construct Buzludza. The grand opening on the 23rd of August 1981 was attended by the world's top communist leaders. The site was immediately glorified throughout the communist world as a beacon of power.
Many of the communist structures that we'll see were almost monuments to either individuals or to military control, to the power of that communist party. They weren't necessarily beautiful, or maybe they were beautiful in their own way. There was certainly a lot of concrete involved.
It served as a mecca for communism. Visits had a ritualized character and took the form of an organized pilgrimage. It also doubled as a meeting place for the Bulgarian Communist Party.
People were really impressed and astonished by the building. They still remember until today their visits. And in this sense, Buzludza was a really effective tool of creating communist mythology.
For 8 years, it served as the emblem of Bulgarian communism and drew 3 million visitors, all requiring written permission before making the trip. 1989, however, saw the dawn of a new age. It was the beginning of the end for the USSR. And Todor Zhikov's fall from power rendered the Buzludza monument a relic of the past. With no interest in preserving this symbol of communism, the new regime closed its doors, and it was abandoned. Today, having suffered decades of looting and vandalism, Buzludza monument is a ruined shell, clouded in mist, and its future looks bleak. On the 24th of November 2016, the Bulgarian government passed a new law banning public displays of communist symbols. So, are they going to tear it down, or will this hill return to its former glory? Future generations may never know that here stood a powerful icon of Bulgarian communism.
Say what you like about Eastern Europe communist regimes, but they could certainly make a statement structurally.
It can explain the story of its creation. It can be a very interesting museum about history, Bulgarian history, and it will overcome the trauma of the communist past.
Deep in the forests of upstate New York hides a remote island on the Hudson River. And on it, what appears to be the remnants of a mighty castle.
When you first see these ruins, it looks like just another castle over a brooding Scottish loch.
Scattered ruins sprawl across the island. Concealed amongst the trees are multiple turrets and towers typical of a palace or medieval castle, fortified with battlements and arrow slits.
So what is its purpose? The giveaway is in the letters along one of its walls.
What was this impressive fortification trying to protect? And why was it abandoned? In the year 1900, at the center of New York City, millionaire businessman Francis Bannerman VI ran a successful military surplus empire. His store of military materials on Broadway covered almost an entire block. But he needed a warehouse big enough to store his explosive supplies, including some 30 million munition cartridges left over from the Spanish-American War of 1898. Neil Kaplan, head of Bannerman Castle Trust, runs this fantastical castle.
The city did not want him to store black powder there because it's very, very volatile, and just a small cup could blow up an entire building.
A solution was found, 50 miles up the Hudson River from New York City, on a piece of land considered haunted by some Native American tribes, the uninhabited Polypal Island. Bannerman purchased the rocky land for $600 and created a series of structures to house his dangerous supplies. And it evolved into this mighty fortress, Bannerman's Island Arsenal, better known as Bannerman's Castle.
This is no Scottish castle. It's no British stately home or ruined French chateau. This is an ammunition warehouse.
It was close enough to New York to carry on business, and where his lethal catalogue of goods wouldn't pose a threat. Placing his own unique stamp on the island, Bannerman turned his hand to design.
He was an amateur architect. There were no blueprints. He actually drew on napkins and on paper. And when he built something, he said, I want you to build it up to here. And if you didn't like it, he would say, brick it up and put another window in or something. And the whole place was built like that.
Work began in spring 1901, blasting away tons of rock to create a level platform for a 3-story warehouse. As business boomed, so too did Bannerman's island creation. In 1905, he constructed 2 more buildings and a harbor wall to receive and store his expanding arms empire. Rather than design them in simple fashion, he wanted something far more elaborate. And he drew on his family heritage for inspiration.
If I just passed by Bannerman's Castle randomly and I didn't know where in the world I was, I'd look at the kind of quite classic, traditional stone appearance of it, the fact that it's quite castle-like, and I think I'm in northern Scotland somewhere.
Why did Bannerman design the building like he did? Well, he was a proud Scot, and he was paying homage to his homeland. So anything he could use to make the structure look sort of castle-esque, that's what he wanted to do.
His building methods were anything but ordinary. To create the harbor, he sank multiple barges filled with junk and rubble to act as foundations.
Frank Bannerman was a practical businessman who made his fortune selling junk. What does that mean? It means he never wasted a thing. If he couldn't sell it, he used it. Old bedstands, pieces of battleship, he used them to reinforce his building.
Incredibly, his unconventional approach to building also extended to all of the structures on the island.
When you think about the way this building's actually been put together, which is a complete mishmash of all kinds of different materials, with a bit of brick and a very thin layer of concrete actually surrounding that, I mean, that sounds questionable enough for someone to live in or to reside in, but then you put explosives in there, and I think that that's quite frankly a terrible idea.
Yet, in 1908, this structure stored one of the largest private collections of army surplus and ammunition ever seen in the United States. In this respect, Bannerman was a pioneer.
Army surplus stores were everywhere today, but that wasn't always the case. It's thanks to Bannerman. He's the one who bought this stuff. Nobody else cared. And before long, Hollywood, Broadway, they're turning to him, and him only, for their props.
Bannerman's military equipment and uniforms filled the sets of Broadway and Hollywood. But to be closer to all his new ammunition, Bannerman moved his family into his own purpose-built castle. Its amateur construction and explosive stock, however, was a recipe for disaster. It was a ticking time bomb.
You realized, this is not the work of a master craftsman. This has a flavor of DIY to it. And that's what's so interesting. From a distance, impressive. Close up, not so much.
I love the idea of taking scrap bits of metal and material and making something fantastic out of it. The one thing I wouldn't recommend is doing that on a structure. Because ultimately, if you're going to live in there, it needs to stand up. I definitely wouldn't want to live there.
Francis continued building and enlarging the complex until his death in 1918, when the business passed to his wife, Helen. Then, on the 15th of August, 1920, disaster struck.
His wife was here, Helen Bannerman. She was up at the residence, sitting in her hammock, and as soon as she got up, she went into the house to get a cup of tea. She turned around, and the building blew up, and a piece of that building went right in the hammock where she was sitting.
200 pounds of black powder stored in a munitions house exploded, throwing a 25-foot section of wall across the river and onto the railway tracks. Miraculously, Bannerman's castle complex survived the explosion. For 30 years, as Bannerman's business dwindled, his island complex fell into disrepair. Then, in 1969, a catastrophic fire that burnt for 3 days sealed its fate. Bannerman's castle was abandoned. Today, the ruins are stabilized, and Bannerman's Island has become a popular tourist attraction, hosting guided tours, theatrical events, and film nights. Francis Bannerman's fantasy castle continues to fascinate all those who visit.
He left an incredible building here, which is an icon all over the world. People come and ask about Bannerman Island.
Clearly, Bannerman's building is in a state of disrepair. It will require millions to restore, but I think we should make the effort because this is a slice of history that, well, frankly, I don't think should be forgotten.
Now abandoned, they were once on the cutting edge of human engineering. Within these decaying structures are the echoes of history. They speak of war and terror, but also of exploration and human endeavor.